Chronicles of the War of Souls book series. Book 1 Valeria, The Beginning of the End. Chapter 4. Alliance of Venom and Steel. The army began its march heavily and noisily, like a great beast that had crawled from the thicket and now dragged its body across the merciless sand. It left behind a bloodied field, strewn with bodies already beginning to bloat in the sun, and black, impatient vultures silently dividing their feast. The air over the battlefield shimmered with heat and the thick scent of coppery blood, spilled entrails, and dust churned by thousands of feet and paws. The shaman led it from the front, like a dark helmsman, and his staff pulsed rhythmically with a dull crimson light, like a second, malevolent heart beating the tempo for this march. That light was thick, like congealed blood, and looking at it left a bitter taste in the throat, and only Mursal walked steadily and stubbornly ahead of him, in heavy, humiliating chains. A guide leading them to their own doom, or perhaps to some unknown, unthinkable salvation. The chain links clanked dully in time with his steps, leaving small furrows in the sand. "How far to your tribe?" "A day's march, I think," asked the shaman. His voice sounded flat and dry, like the creak of sun-dried leather on old bone, without the slightest hint of impatience or fatigue. There was no malice, no triumph in that voice, only cold, sharp-edged practicality. And that made it more terrible than any scream. The captive khajiit did not answer with words, did not grant him a glance. He only felt how the sun-scorched metal hoops spurned the skin on his wrists, and this pain reminded him that he was still alive, that his body still belonged to him. Only a short, almost weightless, yet distinct nod of the head, barely visible under the corselet, confirmed the shaman's guess. In his golden, raptor-like eyes, fixed on the heat-shimmering line of the horizon, there was a silent, soul-chilling readiness, a readiness to lead these invaders with their sharp axes, foul-smelling bodies, and hungry gazes straight to the place he had called home since childhood, since the very day he first breathed the bitter scent of wormwood, and heard his mother's guttural songs. The column stretched out into a long, sinuous snake across the loose dunes, left behind a chaotic trail of thousands of prints, the paws of wargs, the heavy, iron-shod boots of orcs, and the broad, slab-like feet of ogres. The wind, that eternal and faceless inhabitant of the desert, immediately set to work, slowly sweeping away these signs, as if erasing the memory of their passage. But the memory of them was already being absorbed into the very air, into the thick smell of sweat, leather, and metal that hung over the column like a heavy cloud. The sun, climbing ever higher in a mercilessly blue, empty sky, burned away the last remnants of the night's coolness, and now each breath seared the lungs, and the glare from the armor made eyes water. Yet the shaman's warriors, still buoyed by the recent bloody victory, paid little heed to the mounting heat. From the stretched-out ranks came sporadic, guttural calls, the monotonous scrape of armor against armor, a sound like the grinding of a giant's jaw, and the heavy, resonant tread of mighty ogres, making small pebbles jump on the sand. Occasionally, a short, vicious laugh or a muffled curse rang out, but more often, only heavy, snorting breath and the rustle of sand underfoot. They marched, bound by the iron will of their leader, to where their silent prisoner with raptor eyes was leading them. The shaman walked at the head of this steel torrent, his gaze fixed on Mursal's back. On every muscle of his stooped figure, he observed every, even the smallest, movement of the captive, the slightest turn of his head, absorbing every detail of this lifeless landscape they now traversed. The khajiit led them confidently, without a shadow of doubt or hesitation. His stubborn silence was now more eloquent than any, even the most detailed, words. He knew this land, every grain of sand, like the back of his hand, every gentle pass, every sandy ridge, every dark stone protruding from the sand. Sometimes he would only slightly, almost imperceptibly, change direction, smoothly skirting invisible deadly dangers of the wastes, treacherous quicksand or fragile patches where the earth could give way at any moment, under the weight of the multi-ton army. The chain of captive khajiit clanked rhythmically behind him, the heavy metal rings marking the tempo of each step, the dull clang merging with the rustle of sand under hundreds of feet. Their faces, covered in a layer of dust and dried sweat, remained stony and impassive, masks carved from the same stuff as the rocks of their homeland, but in their eyes, sharp and golden, in some, the youngest, whose wrinkles had not yet hardened into permanent severity, a different, deeper story was written. It was a mute, chilling anxiety, pulsing to the beat of the heart, and an endless, gnawing shame from within. They understood all too well that each of their steps, each breath marked by foreign command, was leading this dark helmsman and his iron horde straight to the very heart of their home, to the cool caves where the elders, women, and children remained, to the last reserves of water, to the places sacred to the tried. This bitter, poisonous knowledge lay upon their souls heavier than any, even the strongest fetters, for chains bound only the body, while this thought imprisoned the very spirit in a cage of hopelessness. And ahead, beyond the shimmering, deceptive mirage that made the horizon fluid and unreliable, the first signs of the desert's end began to slowly emerge, like an insistent but faithful vision. First, they were just dark, indistinct blotches on the red expanse, rocky outcrops, the hard bones of the earth breaking through the sandy flesh. Then the air, still searing, began to carry a different smell, not of dry doust, but the bitterish aroma of rare, tough, thorny vegetation clinging to life among the stones. And finally, from the very heat, from the waves of hot air, vague but increasingly clear and majestic outlines appeared. These were no longer mere hills, but tall, fantastical rock formations rearing towards the sky. They resembled giant, desiccated fingers of some unimaginable titan, buried beneath the sands in ages past, fingers forever and mutely pointing into the empty, indifferent sky. For the Shaman's army, just a new landmark on the campaign map. For the captive khajiit, a silent, accusing monument to their defeat and a bitter sign that home was near, and they were leading death to it. Hidden from the merciless, scorching gaze of the wastes, the sanctuary of the desert wind tribe, to which Mursal was leading them, was a wondrous and fragile contradiction, a true island of ordered, seething life amidst a silent kingdom of sand and stone. Colossal, hoary cliffs, rearing skyward like ancient, slumbering titans, formed a vast natural amphitheater, its walls polished over centuries by sand-laden winds until they acquired smooth, flowing, water-like forms. In their very heart, at the foot of the most massive stone block, from a dark crevice, seeped, did not gush, a life-giving moisture. It was born directly from the stone, slowly, drop by drop, trickling down the porous, damp surface and gathering into a deep natural pool, its water so cold and crystal clear it seemed to hold within its depths the eternal memory of untouched subterranean ice. The tribe's dwellings, as if growing from the earth itself, were ranged in tiers, following the curves of the cliffs. At the very base, in the dust, huddled low, rounded structures like nests, skillfully woven from flexible saxo branches and bitter wormwood and covered with dense, warm felt from camel wool, dyed in sun-faded ochre and blue patterns. Higher up, in the blessed cool of rocky niches and hand-hewn caves, the dark, tuple-like entrances to more secure and ancient shelters were visible, connected by swaying rope bridges and narrow staircases carved directly into the stone's breast. The air here was different, humid, cool, and thickly saturated with a mixture of wet stone, acrid hearth smoke, and bitter, pungent wormwood. The khajiit themselves moved through this labyrinth with that innate, feline grace born only of complete and utter fusion with the harsh land. Their lean, weary figures in quilted, dusty, clay-colored clothing performed every movement with maximum precision and economy, as if conserving strength for a long and perilous journey. Their eyes, golden with vertical, cat-like pupils, constantly, even at rest, tracked everything around them, and their sharp, sensitive ears caught the slightest suspicious rustle. Everywhere, at the feet of adults, in the shade of awnings, beside quietly playing children, saber-toothed cats moved leisurely or rested serenely, curled up in balls. The gazes of these majestic, powerful beasts were full of calm, almost human awareness, and their presence was as natural and integral as that of the khajiit themselves. Life here flowed unhurriedly, subject to the ancient, unshakable rhythms of the desert. Women, their fingers dexterous and accustomed to constant labor, ground grains of hardy wild cereals on stone millstones, while others, squatting, worked hides stretched on wooden frames. Men, sitting in small, silent groups in the shade, repaired their weapons, carefully polishing arrow shafts or honing the blades of their curved blades to razor sharpness, which occasionally flashed in the sun rays like malevolent stars. Even the children, just as quiet, agile, and serious, were an integral part of this communal labor, helping with chores or, under the elders' supervision, learning the first crucial lessons of handling small, but real wooden daggers. Everything in this wondrous place, from the low, cool hiding doors of the dwellings to every deliberate, unhurried gesture of its inhabitants, silently spoke of a people who had not conquered the desert but had long and forever become an inseparable part of it, drawing from its meager, but eternal breast both harsh wisdom and the strength to live. Life in the desert wind sanctuary, this stone heart amidst a sea of sand, obeyed one single, harsh and inexorable law of survival, and its fragile well-being rested not only on the meager gifts of the land but also on the ancient, honed skill of taking by force and cunning what the wastes themselves could not or would not give. When scouts, the keenest and most silent shadows among the warriors, brought news on their swift feet of approaching foreign caravans or wandering, clumsy detachments near the scarce oases, hunting parties slipped out from the cool shadow of the rock fortress, silently, like wisps of smoke. The khajiit parties, rarely more than 100 strong, moved like phantoms, merging with every contour of the terrain, with every shadow. Their saber-toothed companions stepped just as silently, their mottled, sand-colored hides making them nearly invisible in the shimmering, deceptive haze. They were not simple bandits in the crude, familiar sense. Their raids, calculated and precise, resembled more the collection of some ancient tribute, which the desert itself silently permitted them to take from those who were not strong, vigilant, or fortunate enough to hold on to it. Under the cover of thick night or in the most scorching noon heat, when outsiders sweltered, they struck, always swift, always precise and merciless, like a scorpion's sting. To fight, if it could be called that, never lasted long, a few bloody minutes. Their goal was not glory or cruelty, but simple, harsh resources. They took everything to the last crumb: sweaty sacks of grain, heavy waterskins of fresh water, tools, pieces of precious metal, sturdy fabrics, and, of course, weapons. Nothing was to be wasted in this world where every grain, every drop could mean the difference between life and a slow, agonizing death in the sands. Then, as silently and inexorably as they had appeared, they retreated to their rocks, carrying their bloody spoils into the heart of the stone labyrinth. These trophies, won at the cost of others' lives, were then meticulously processed, repaired, and woven into the very fabric, the very flesh of the tribe's life. Foreign grain was mixed with their own meager harvest, foreign crude metal reforged into their elegant blades and sharp arrowheads. It was an eternal, silent, and cruel cycle of the desert, where strength, agility, and cunning gave the right not only to life but to the resources of others. The desert wind tribe did not exist in proud, complete isolation, but was skillfully woven into a complex, nearly invisible web of connections and agreements spanning the boundless expanse of the wastes. Their well-being rested not only on the strength of the blade and the cunning of the scout, but on the ancient, ritualized art of barter, honed and perfected over many generations. When certain star patterns, known only to the elders, formed in the clear night sky, small, silent groups of khajiit would leave the rocky sanctuary. They carried not weapons, but rare fruits of their patient craftsmanship, crystals of salt gleaming in the sun, mined in the depths of dark caves, soft as smoke fabrics woven from the wool of swift dromedaries, and exquisite, delicate items made from bone and tough leather. The meeting places were mute, eternal witnesses of antiquity, lonely stone pillars rising from the sand like forgotten gods, or dry, cracked riverbeds where life-giving moisture still lurked under hard clay. The barter itself was conducted almost without words. It was a complex, almost musical language of barely perceptible gestures, short nods, and expressive glances, where every detail, every wrinkle by the eye had its meaning. In exchange for their goods, they received various foreign wares and tools, precious wood and iron, unfamiliar foods, and, most importantly, invaluable tidings, the latest news of outsider movements, be it the endless hordes of the Iron Maw or the steel-clad legions of the distant empire. Once a year, when bales of rare goods filled the cool storerooms to capacity, the tribe equipped a large caravan. It headed to the very edge of the desert, where loose sands gave way to faded, sun-bleached steppes, and on the horizon, like dreams, rose the stern stone walls of human border towns. Leading the caravan was always the most insightful and eloquent of the kin, whose nimble mind was capable of playing subtle, multi-layered games with outsiders. Laden dromedaries, slow and enduring, bore on their humps the desert's finest riches: sacks of medicinal clay, bundles of magnificent, rare saber-toothed pelts, a casket with gemstones holding within their depths the glimmers of the sunset sky. The journey was long and fraught with hidden perils, each leg a mortal threat, from hungry bandits to sudden, all-sweeping sandstorms. Entering the alien, nosy world behind the high walls of a human city was a trial for the spirit. The humans in their chainmail looked upon the newcomers with open, unconcealed mistrust, their hands resting on the hilts of their short swords. The trade took place in a noisy, dusty market where the air was thick and heavy with foreign, sharp smells of roasting meat, spices, and human sweat. The khajiit maintained a cold, inscrutable dignity, their golden eyes impassively, like predators. Assessing the offered goods, they exchanged the gifts of their dessert for heavy, valuable steel ingots, sharp iron saws and axes, sturdy, unfamiliar fabrics, and sometimes intricate mechanisms or incomprehensible scrolls with schematics. Unfathomable, but alluring with their hidden knowledge. The caravan's return home, to the cliff shadows, was like a long-held breath finally released. They had navigated all foreign snares again and brought their people not just goods, but new tools, new possibilities for continuing their eternal, unceasing struggle for life in the harsh embrace of the desert. Their conscious, proud rejection of heavy, cumbersome armor and magic was not born of weakness or ignorance. On the contrary, it was the result of a deep, hard-won understanding of themselves and the world in which they were born and destined to die. Heavy armor, those bulky, nosy steel shells so beloved by humans and orcs, were for the khajiit not protection, but a living cage, a death sentence. It hampered every movement, slowed their swift, deadly battle dance, robbed them of their primary and only advantage, speed, which turned them into fleeting, unstoppable shadows on the battlefield. In armor, one could not silently, like a snake, creep up on an oasis guard, could not climb a sheer, scorching cliff after a wounded antelope, could not escape a sudden, blinding sandstorm. Their true protection was not alien steel, but the desert itself, the age-old skill of merging with it, using every dark stone and every shifting dune as both shelter and weapon. As for magic, they did not simply deny it, as one denies a foolish rumor. They feared it deeply, on the level of ancient instinct, as one fears the sudden shadow of a vulture or a poisonous, near-invisible snake lurking under a rock. They had seen with their own eyes how magic, that blind, capricious, and cruel force, twisted living flesh and mind, subjected solid will to an alien, black whim. Their world was one of simple, tangible things, a blade sharp as hunger, swift, tireless legs, an ear keen as a night beast's. Magic was to them like the heat haze that distorts the horizon, something deceptive, unreliable, capable of betraying and incinerating at the most crucial, decisive moment. They preferred to rely on the strength of their sinewy muscles, the sharpness of their steel claws, and an unyielding, rock-solid will, forces proven true by 1,000 journeys, their own native forces, and thus, their warrior, clad only in a quilted, dust-impregnated robe, with a curved, wine-singing blade in a narrow hand, was truly more fearsome than any orc in shining plate. His armor was his feline speed, his shield, his serpentine agility, and his one and only magic, a ruthless, bone-deep practical efficiency honed in the eternal, daily struggle for survival in the most merciless heart of the wastes. That day began like any other in the desert wind's rock sanctuary, this stone hive. The sun, huge and crimson, was just touching the peaks of the stone titans, tainting them in coppery, fiery tones, when along the narrow, terrorless paths hewn into the cliff's breast, a single scout descended swiftly, dislodging stones. He moved with that unnatural, strength-draining speed used only when news brooked no delay and carried death on its wings. His quilted robe was thick with dust, and his chest heaved heavily, like a blacksmith's bellows, exhaling short plumes of vapor into the cold morning air. Without uttering a word, without looking around, he passed through the entire camp, and his very appearance, his mute haste, silenced even the most boisterous playing children. The women instantly stopped grinding grain, and the men, without a word, set aside their tools. Their hands instinctively, of their own accord, reaching for the hilts of their blades. The scout, without slackening his resolute stride, headed straight for the settlement center, where at the very foot of the spring, under a low awning of faded camel hides, the elders usually sat. He dropped to one knee, forehead touching the hot stone, and the words he gasped out hung in the frozen air, cold and heavy as lumps of subterranean ice. They are coming, from the Iron Maw, an entire army. The silence that followed these words was deafening, physically oppressive. Even the eternal, lulling whisper of the spring seemed to hush for a moment. Then the elders, without a sound, exchanged glances, and in their eyes, usually calm and confident like those of old eagles, flashed something not seen in this sanctuary for a long time. living, and veiled alarm. The news spread through the camp faster than a stream runs over dry snow after a downpour. It was passed not with shouts but with a rapid, hissing whisper, mouth to ear, changing expressions on faces, making strong hands clench into hard fists. The children's play ceased in an instant. They, sensing the iron tension of the adults, silently pressed close to their mothers, clutching at their hems. The saber-tooths, catching the subtle shift in their master's mood, raised their heavy heads. Ears pricked, and a low, troubled growl rumbled from deep throats. This day, which had begun so peacefully, was no longer like yesterday. The air filled with a thick expectation and the familiar, steely taste of an approaching storm. The long, ugly shadow from the Iron Maw, whispered about for so long, had finally reached their most secret, hidden sanctuary. From under the low awning woven of dry branches and wine-worn camel hides, slowly, leaning on a staff, the old chieftain emerged. His appearance was not swift, but in his very unhurriedness was such an age-heavy power that all present, warriors, elders, women who had stopped by the hearths, turned their gaze upon him as if hypnotized. He was tall and lean, as a desert tree dried over centuries, holding onto a bare stone with its roots, and his face, etched with deep wrinkles, resembled an old, worn map of the endless sands, where each fold had been carved by years of sun, wind, and decisions made. Long, completely gray dreadlocks, interwoven with bone beads and vulture feathers dulled by time, lay on his bony shoulders like silent, wise serpents. He did not ask what had happened. His golden eyes, still incredibly sharp and penetrating, slowly slid over the panting scout's face, absorbing not the spoken words, but the very scent of his fear, the dust on his clothes. The distant torture of heat then over the faces of the elders, frozen in silent alarm, reading in their narrowed lids and clenched jaws all he needed to know, and finally swept over the entire frozen camp, where accustomed life had halted in mute expectation, where even the children had fallen silent, instinctively sensing a shift in the very air. "I have heard," he uttered at last. His voice was quiet, rasping like the whisper of sand over sun-scorched stone in the pre-dawn hour, but it carried such inner strength that his words, clear and heavy as pebbles, reached every ear. Even to the farthest cave, there was not a trace of fear in them, nor a shadow of surprise, only a deep, weary certainty, as if he had all his long life, awaited precisely this day, this news. And now, when it had come, nothing remained in him but readiness to meet what was foreordained. He took a few deliberate, firm steps forward, and his old but clear gaze fixed far beyond the rocky amphitheater, to where the silent wastes lay, breathing with heat haze, now concealing a new, lethal threat. He looked to where the threat was advancing from, and in his gaze was not hatred, but a cold, almost impersonal understanding, like that of a mountain seeing an approaching storm. "So, their time has come," he said slowly, drawing out the words, and his voice sounded not like a shaman's prophecy, but a simple statement of an inevitable, sunrise-like fact, a fact it was pointless to argue against. "And our time has come." And throughout the rocky sanctuary, from the lower, dark storage caves smelling of jerked meat and dried herbs to the uppermost tiers, with swallows' nests and sun-bleached bones, activity began to boil. Quiet, focused, and terrible in its purposefulness. It was not chaos, but the awakening of one huge, many-legged and many-eyed entity whose name was the tribe. From dark caves and under low awnings, warriors appeared, many warriors. They did not crowd or fuss. Each, from the gray-haired hunter to the young warrior feeling the weight of a real battle blade on his palm for the first time, knew his place and his task. Hundreds upon hundreds of khajiit, men and women in their prime, with faces severe and inscrutable as desert stones, began preparing to march. Their silence was louder than any battle cry. The air in the rocky sanctuary filled with the light, ringing whisper of steel. Warriors checking the sharpness of their curved, sickle-like blades and long knives for the last time against the pad of a thumb. There was the dry rustle of bowstrings being drawn on short, deadly bows of horn and strong wood. No loud talk was heard, no cheerful exhortations, only short, abrupt phrases uttered in quiet, guttural voices understandable only to their own. Their movements were swift, precise, and devoid of fuss, honed by thousands of drills and innate bodily knowledge. Some adjusted their dust and sweat-impregnated robes, others, almost without stopping, scooped a handful of cool, precious water from the spring, tasting it on the ton. storing its life-giving taste and the memory of home for the long, dusty road ahead. The saber-tooths, sensing the familiar metallic scent of preparations and the tension emanating from them, rose from their resting places in the shade. Adult battle cats, mighty and silent, with muscles playing under mottled hides, approached and rubbed their powerful flanks against their warriors' legs, emitting a low, deep, visceral purr, and in their amber, unbeastly intelligent eyes burned the same cold, ready for anything fire as in their khajiits. They sniffed hands, licked palms, and in this gesture was the whole ancient oath binding their kin to take their place, slowly and majestically occupying predetermined defensive positions on the cliff ledges, came other, no less formidable guardians, old saber-tooths covered in a web of whitish scars, no longer fit for swift raids, but still capable of breaking a neck or spine with one powerful snap of their jaws. Beside them, like shadows, khajiit youths scurry, their slender but already sinewy hands gripping the hilts of light daggers, eyes burning with a complex mix of feline fear, pride, and adult, severe resolve not to fail, not to retreat a single step. And in the very heart of the camp, at the foot of the cliffs where the morning hearth's warmth still lingered, remained those for whom battle was no longer their lot, women, whose faces instantly became stone, impenetrable masks, hiding the last, treacherous tears. Wiping them with the backs of their hands, gather the frightened, quiet children closer to the dark, cool caves, whispering short, soothing words. Elders, whose bones could no longer bear arms, but whose eyes, faded by time, were more experienced than the young, silently took up positions at the highest points, ready to become keen, silent sentinels whose cry would sound first. The entire camp, just recently full of peaceful, measured life, now split in two, as if cleaved by a sharp blade, one part of it, living, sharp, and deadly, prepared to leave for the shifting sands, to become a storm itself, quiet and inexorable. The other, vulnerable and defenseless, froze in the deep shadow of the cliffs, ready only to wait, and wait, silently, with bated breath and short, clipped prayers to ancestors on their lips, until the wind brought them the first sound of battle or silence. At the head of the gathered host, majestically astride a colossal white saber-tooth, appeared the chieftain himself. The beast was incredibly large and powerful, its rare fur gleaming like ivory in the morning light, and its eyes burned with a cold, fathomless blue fire, as if holding the memory of ancient, untouchable ice from distant, unreachable mountains. The old ruler sat on his saber-tooth's back straight and motionless as an idol, his face with its eagle-like, proud profile turned to the narrow exit from the gorge, beyond which the sand awaited. Beside him, on his own, slightly smaller saber-tooth of sandy hue, rode Mursal. His posture was just as proud and straight, but deep in his golden eyes, alongside steely resolve, lay all the weight of hereditary responsibility. He was not just one of the warriors, he was the chieftain's son, an heir going into battle shoulder to shoulder with his father. Behind them, in a silent, many-headed and formidable river, moved all that could hold a weapon, the entire fighting strength of the tribe. Hundreds of khajiit on their saber-tooths moved in perfect, precise formation, obeying an unseen rhythm. No sound was heard, only the soft, muffled thud of powerful paws on stone and rare, restrained snorts from the beasts. Their faces under hoods were severe and focused, blades ready on their hips, taut bows on their backs. They marched to meet the threat that had emerged from the very Iron Maw, not as doomed victims, but as the storm itself, ready to sweep from its path any, even the most terrible, obstacle. The desert wind host moved with a phantom, almost unnatural silence, using every fold of the terrain, every shadow. Soon, a panting, dust-covered scout made his way to the chieftain and Mursal, weaving between the warriors. "They are heading for the Oasis of Three Stones," he gasped, barely catching his breath, his chest heaving. The very one where not long ago he didn't speak it aloud, but all understood. "Their column is headed straight there, not swerving." The chieftain nodded coldly, without a trace of surprise. The enemies were deliberately marching to the site of their recent, shameful defeat, a mute but clear challenge, a spit in the face. "Then we shall meet them there," the chieftain answered quietly but clearly, his voice like ice, "by the very same cliffs that already became their tombstone." The host, as if by an invisible command, quickened its pace, now heading straight for the oasis by the shortest, winding path known only to khajiit and their beasts. They moved faster, far faster than the heavy, clumsy army of the Shaman, and when they reached their goal, They still had a little time to take the best positions. Even before the oasis itself appeared ahead, the air round became thick and unbearable, filled with a heavy, suffocating stench that struck the nose and throat. It was a thick, nauseating mixture of the sweetish smell of rotting flesh and the acrid, metallic reek of old, congealed blood, long since baked into the sand and stones. The place itself, when they came upon it, was a ghastly, repellent sight. The remains, already festering for several days under the scorching sun, were in various, disgusting stages of decay. Some bodies, lying in open areas, had been picked clean by scavengers. Only skeletons, bleached white by the sun, lay scattered on the sand like a giant's bones. Others, sheltered in cliff shadows, had swollen and darkened, their skin bursting under internal gas pressure, exposing dark, maggot-swarming masses within. The water in the once living, clear spring stood murky, greenish-dark, and on its surface, alongside the dead bodies of what had once been orcs, floated unnatural, rainbow-like, oily slicks. This place, where short, furious life had once seethed, was now just a huge, gaping wound on the desert's body, and everyone who set foot here felt its cold, silent, and heavy curse on their skin. The khajiit, without a word, silently, like phantoms, dispersed among the rocks surrounding the dead oasis. They froze in wait, merging with the stone. The silence hanging over the oasis was ominous and oppressive, broken only by the monotonous rustle of wind-blown sand. And then from the west, from the very depths of the desert, came the first ominous sound, a distant but relentlessly growing rumble of thousands of feet, the clang of steel on steel, and intermittent, guttural cries like barks. On the horizon, in the shimmering heat haze, dark masses wavered, and from it began to slowly emerge, as if from a monster's womb, the entire countless army of the Iron Maw. First the giant ogres with cumbersome wagons, then the endless, grey ranks of orcs on ferocious, squat wargs. When the sun had almost completely disappeared behind the sharp ridge of cliffs, tainting the sky in deep, morning violet tones, one of those awaited with a particular, heart-constricting trepidation, returned to the hidden desert wind sanctuary. He appeared without warning, emerging from the thickening evening twilight, and the very manner of his return, his lone figure, spoke volumes before he could utter a single word. The rider sat on his saber-tooth, but his posture, usually straight as a spear and proud, was now broken, bent under an invisible weight. He did not guide the beast but simply sat, surrendered to its will, like a sack of bones. The saber-tooth, a majestic predator whose fur usually gleamed with health and strength, was covered in a thick layer of dust that lay upon it like an even, gray, funerary shroud. Its mighty, always tense flanks rose heavily and infrequently, and its head was lowered so low that the powerful, souled chin almost touched the ground. But the most terrible, soul-chilling thing was not the rider's appearance or his exhausted companion. It was what emanated from them, enveloped them, a silent, heavy, leaden despair that seemed to alter the very quality of the air round, making it thick and bitter. It was written in the rider's extinguished, vacant gaze, in his hands lying on the saber-tooth's fur without any strength, in the way his once broad shoulders were now hunched inward with mute, all-consuming pain. Women, placing clay jugs by the entrance to cool caves, froze mid-step, caught in awkward poses. Elders, sitting by smoldering coals reminiscing about bygone youth, cut off their speech mid-sentence and slowly, with effort, turned their heads toward this lone, broken figure. Even the saber-tooths, dozing in the evening cool, raised their heavy, intelligent heads, ears pricked, catching an unfamiliar, alien and troubling note in the familiar, lulling sounds of the camp settling to sleep. No one moved, no one called his name. There was no need for words or questions to understand the simple and terrible truth. Hovering in the air, the man who had left in the morning with a whole troop, with hope in his heart, with his own son in the ranks, had returned alone, and in his funereal silence, in his hunched, seemingly broken back, in the all-encompassing dust covering him and his faithful beast, lay a whole tale of death and loss, more eloquent and terrible than any, even the bitterest words. The chieftain stood before his silent circle of elders, and his figure, always the embodiment of indomitable will and strength, now seemed broken, suddenly aged by half a century. Desert dust covered his face and hands in a gray, dead film, through which a deathly, earthy pallor showed. There were as many of them as grains of sand in the desert. We lost that war. His voice was hollow, devoid of any intonation, as if coming from a deep, cold well. No one escaped, no one, except me. He made a short, Heavy pause, letting these terrible, simple words penetrate their consciousness like a knife. When I headed here, very few were still alive without any hope, he continued, and in his eyes, fixed on emptiness, seemed to stand living, agonizing images of tribesmen. All our strength, all our pride, turned to dust. All our fury is crushed and trampled. He slowly, with incredible effort, shifted his extinguished gaze to the elders' faces, and in his look was not just a father's grief for a lost son, but the heavy, merciless realization of the complete, total defeat of his entire people. They will come here, he uttered quietly, yet so that everyone heard. And these words carried not a threat but a final, irrevocable sentence. Their path lies straight to our cliffs, to our hearth, to our children. We must leave. Now, leave everything, while there is still a grain of time left. The silence that followed his words was more terrible than any explosion or scream. It was the full, unconditional acknowledgement of the catastrophe that had befallen their people, the end of a whole world. The chieftain began his tale slowly, straining for words as if each caused him real, physical pain, tearing from his throat with blood. He described everything, down to the last monstrous detail, from the first volleys of arrows falling like clouds on the orc hordes to the last desperate cry of his son, drowned by the all-consuming enemy roar. He spoke of the blind fury of the saber-tooths meeting steel ranks and perishing under hammers, of the silent, stoic valor of khajiit falling under crushing blows of heavy weapons, of how before his eyes all hope crumbled and the ranks of his tribe melted away like wax in fire. He hid neither the enemy's cruelty and numbers, nor his own tactical miscalculations, nor the bitter, coppery taste of total, unconditional defeat. When the last, broken word of his tale hung in the heavy, par-like air, he turned to one of the elders, a grayed, emaciated khajiit named Actor, with a face etched by ancient ritual scars of wisdom and years lived. Actor. The chieftain's voice suddenly regained firmness, but now it was the terrible firmness of final despair. Send the messages, now, to all tribes within an eagle's reach, to the dawn cliffs, the sand phantoms, the children of the dry riverbed. Let every chieftain, every elder know what black storm has risen from the very Iron Maw. He paused, fixing his gaze on the elder's intelligent, weary eyes. If we do not stand together, if we do not unite now into a single, steel fist, the fate of Desert Wind will befall each and every one. From one end of the wastes to the other, not a single gorge, not a single cave will remain where one could hide from this all-shattering steel and fury. Elder Actor silently, without extra words, nodded. And in that simple movement was all the weight of accepted fate. He rose from his stone seat, and his movements, despite his advanced years and withered joints, were suddenly filled with firm resolve. He headed toward one of the far, darkened caves, where in a specially arranged niche, on a wooden perch, his eagle was kept, a majestic, proud bird with piercing eyes full of mute wild freedom. Such birds, trained over many years and revered as messengers of the gods, served as the fastest and most reliable link between the scattered, grain-like tribes of the desert. Soon its sharp, grasping talons would carry into the night tightly rolled leather scrolls bearing news of the great calamity threatening to swallow them all without a trace. Then the chieftain slowly looked over all the gathered elders, and in his eyes, extinguished and deep as to dried-up wells, burned now not the furious fire of battle, but a cold, steely light of resolve born of the very last, bitter despair. This light was more terrible than any anger, for it meant the end of illusions and the beginning of a path where the price of error was complete disappearance. We must leave this place, he said evenly, without raising his voice, and his words sounded in the stone, oppressive silence like a final, irrevocable verdict carved on the tablets of fate itself. The force that crushed our host is already approaching. I hear their steps in the beating of my own heart. The wind already carries their scent here, and we, who remain here, will not hold. Not from lack of courage, but because stone, however strong, is eventually worn down by water, and theirs is a whole sea. He looked at each elder in turn, and his heavy, penetrating gaze seemed to implant in them the last particle of his will and authority. Sealing their souls with this decision, he saw in their eyes the reflection of cliffs, the ashes of hearths, and the mute question for which there was no easy answer. Our path lies to the steps, he continued, and his voice acquired a metallic ring. Only there, amidst the endless feather grass that murmurs like the sea, can our tribe find refuge. The grass is tall, the earth firm underfoot, and the wind sings different songs there. Yes, He saw a shadow pass over the listeners' faces and nodded, confirming their unspoken fears. I know of the danger the steppes hold. I remember the yellow eyes of steppe wolves and the hiss of snakes in the roots. But the greatest, most certain threat to us now is the manticores. They hunt in the shifting sands. They breathe this dry dust. Their stings seek prey among stones and dunes. There, and only there, will we have any chance. A chance to survive, catch our breath, gather strength, to one day return. If we remain in these wastes, we will become an easy, defenseless target for them. We, not even reaching the borders of a neighboring tribe, not even having time to ask for help, will be slaughtered like hares in pens. If we do not leave our home now, this home will become our common grave. He fell silent, but there was no need to say more. In the silence following his words, each heard what remained unspoken: the grind of alien armor, the roar of unfamiliar creatures, the cries of dying kin. All was clear. Here, among these familiar, native cliffs, there was no chance. Only flight, bitter and humiliating, but the only possible one, offered a reprieve. The chieftain pointed firmly, without a shadow of doubt, toward a dark, pupil-like opening in a far tamp cave. His finger, dry and gnarled as a root, pointed not just into darkness, a deep into the cliff itself, to where, as only a few knew, an ancient, secret passage was hidden. This gesture was more eloquent than any words. Preparations must begin immediately, secretly, and they would lead not across open land but through the stone bowels of the desert itself, to emerge far from here, at the very edge of the feather grass expanse that leads to one of our old, secret paths. An underground passage known only to us. We, children of the desert, see in the underground dark no worse than under the scorching sun. We will pass quietly, like shadows, without disturbing those ancient spirits that dwell in the stone depths. We have nothing to fear here. His voice grew firmer, regaining the last remnants of his former, indisputable authority. Gather everyone, every woman, every child, every elder. Take only what can be carried. Water, food, weapons. Everything else, everything amassed over centuries, must remain here, in the sand. And then, when a weak, trembling relief had begun to hover in the stifling air at the mere existence of a plan, he added what made the blood run cold in the veins of every listener. And I am staying. He suddenly straightened to his full, considerable height, and in this last, majestic pose was not pride, but something else, more terrible, a complete, unresisting acceptance of his fate. My shame remains there, on the battlefield at the Oasis of Three Stones, and my home is here, in these cliffs. He who could not protect his tribe in battle has no moral right to lead it into exile. My duty now is to meet the enemy on the very threshold of what he wants to take, and to die here, on this land. A concentrated, panic-free, but hurried activity settled over the sanctuary. The chieftain's word, given flesh by the horror of the recent rout, was not discussed or challenged. The elders silently dispersed to their duties, and all life in the camp shifted to a new, anxious, marching rhythm. Women, lips pressed tight, quickly and silently gathered their meager belongings: tarred leather waterskins, worn sacks with jerked meat, and hard flatbreads of ground wild grain. Children, quiet and unnaturally serious for their age, helped as they could, feeling in their skin the cold, clinging fear emanating from the adults. The men, the few who had not gone with the host, led the unhurried dromedaries from their pens. These enduring, silent saviors of the desert. Onto their humped, bony backs, they loaded the most necessary burdens, tightening the bales with ropes of coarse camel wool until they creaked. The animals snorted uneasily and shook their heads, sensing the general, restrained nervousness. And in the farthest end of the cave, where only the weak, flickering light from a hearth reached, elder actor performed his last duty. Carefully, with fingers trembling with age but firm in will, he rolled a thin piece of treated leather, on which conditional signs had been inscribed with a sharp awl, a mute warning and a desperate plea. His old, faithful eagle, perched on a stone ledge, watched its master's movements with intelligent, almost human eyes. Actor whispered something to the bird familiarly, tied the tight scroll to its powerful leg, and released it into the dark, cold passage leading to the surface. The eagle vanished into the underground dark as silently as a ghost, carrying on its strong wings the news of desert wind's demise and that the survivors, like shadows, were fleeing to the steppes, the last place on earth where one might still hide from the advancing steel threat of the Iron Maw. The chieftain slowly, as if walking to the scaffold, approached his white saber-tooth. The beast, colossal and majestic even now, sat calmly, its cold blue, ice-like eyes fixed on its master. They had known each other since the saber-tooth was a blind, squeaking kitten fitting in the palm, and the chieftain a young, hopeful warrior choosing his first hunting companion. The chieftain wrapped his arms around the mighty, scarred neck of the beast, pressing his forehead to its short, thick, warm fur. The saber-tooth responded with a low, guttural, visceral purr, a sound full of boundless devotion and a mute question. "Not here," whispered the chieftain, and his voice was warm and firm only for this one ear. "Your death should not lie beside my shame. You must go with them, with the living." He pulled back, holding the mighty, heavy head in his hands, and looked the beast straight in its understanding eyes. "The tribe that remains, our women and children, need your strength now. You must guide them through the underground dark, can protect them in the foreign steppes. You must become for them now both claws and fangs and shield." A last, distant spark of his former fury flared and died in his weary eyes. "And if the chance arises, if you see him, take vengeance. For all of us." It was not a master's command, but a friend's last request, a testament, a dying wish. The chieftain embraced his most faithful friend tightly, brotherly, feeling the live tension of mighty, battle-ready muscles under his palms. Then he released him and stepped back, breaking the last visible link with the life he had once known and loved. The white saber-tooth looked at him for another moment, as if not understanding and not wishing to understand, and then slowly, with the great dignity of a wild beast, turned and strode toward the assembling caravan, carrying with it into the steppe a part of the chieftain's soul and his very last, secret hope. The khajiit departed into the depths of the caves silently, as befits a people whose life is an eternal struggle with the desert. No loud farewells or hysterical sobs were heard, only quiet, bottomless sorrowful glances they cast upon their chieftain in passing for the last time. Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, held their gaze on him for a moment. Women with frozen, ice-like pain deep in their eyes, elders with silent, ancient understanding of the inevitable, young warriors with clenched jaws and suppressed, boiling fury in their hearts. Some of the elders, passing very close, lightly, almost ritually, touched his shoulder with their fingertips, an ancient, sandaled gesture of highest respect and eternal farewell. He stood motionless as a statue, accepting their mute farewell, his face a mask carved from stone, hiding a whole storm of despair and grief within. He saw laden dromedaries led past him, rustling on the sand, mothers instinctively pressing wide-eyed children to their quilted robes, the last remaining saber-tooths casting parting, understanding glances over their shoulders at him. His white titan, already in the column, turned back, and its blue, cold eyes met the chieftain's gaze. Then the beast slowly, against instinct, walked back, bowed its mighty, scarred head, and, like a simple house cat, gently, almost humanly, licked the chieftain's face with its rough, warm tongue. In this simple, animal gesture was all their long life together, countless years of battles, silent hunts, rare victories and bitter losses. Then the saber-tooth, without a sound, turned and vanished silently as a phantom into the damp dark after its kin. When the last echoes of footsteps, the last rustle of his people, faded in the dark maw of the underground passage, the chieftain remained in the sanctuary utterly alone. Only a lonely wind howled in the emptied caves, and dying hearths cast long, dancing shadows on walls that might never again hear children's laughter or warriors' disputes. Slowly, as if on the rack, he turned to face the exit, toward the wastes, from where his doom was to come. His hand, thin and sinewy, rested on the familiar hilt of his blade. Now he was to perform his last, most bitter duty, to meet the enemy and die, becoming a mute but eternal barrier on their path and an eternal reproach to those who had destroyed all he loved. He walked out of the rocky sanctuary alone, leading the cool shadow of the cliffs, and stood under the open, merciless sky of the wastes. His lone, straight figure stood clear and solitary against the pale sky, like the last sentinel of a long-fallen fortress. The wind, relentless and eternal, tugged at his gray dreadlocks, but he himself remained immobile, like an ancient menhir grown into this earth. In the distance, on the horizon, a huge, reddish dust cloud was already rising and churning, heavy, sluggish, like a living harbinger of death. Through the mounting hum of the desert, familiar, hateful sounds began to reach him. The distant but clear clang of steel on steel, the heavy, resonant tread of ogres, the abrupt, guttural cries of orcs, and the dull, rasping growls of wargs. The entire army of the Iron Shaman was approaching, inexorable, countless, and soulless. He did not take a step back, did not yield an inch. His hands still rested on the hilt, but he did not draw it, did not assume a warrior's stance. He simply stood and waited, unblinkingly watching the approaching, tide-like horde. In his pose was no theatrical challenge or desperate bravado, only a cold, almost detached acceptance of his fate. He knew how insignificant one life was before this avalanche of flesh and metal, but he could meet it here, on the very threshold of his ravaged home. He could make these conquerors walk over his dead body, and in this small, bitter act of defiance lay his last, personal triumph. When the vanguard of the Iron Shaman's army, fanning out like waves, approached the foot of the cliffs, his sharp, all-seeing gaze immediately picked out the lone, motionless figure standing in the path like a mute, forgotten sentinel. The Shaman slowly, with negligent grandeur, raised his hand, and his host, a living, breathing river of steel, muscle, and blind fury, flowed smoothly, obediently around the lone khajiit, closing around him in a dense, threatening but not yet attacking ring. Without taking his cold, studying gaze off the lone figure, the Shaman slightly turned his head to Mursal, who now trudged beside him, his heavy chains clanking. "Who is this?" His voice sounded even, without a trace of anger or surprise, but with unconcealed, almost academic interest. "The one who decided to meet us in proud solitude? Or just bait hiding an ambush we failed to see?" Mursal, hearing the question, raised his head. Seeing his father's lone but unbroken figure, his heart clenched into a lump of icy pain. In his golden, puma-like eyes flashed a swift, lightning-like burst of filial pain and immense pride before they became inscrutable again, like water in a deep well. "This is my father," came the quiet but surprisingly clear answer, so the words were audible in the ensuing silence. "Our chieftain, he who led the Desert Wind tribe for many moons." He made a short pause, his calm voice taking on the familiar, icy bitterness of defeat. "And, apparently, he who decided that his personal road should end right here." The Shaman slowly, almost soundlessly, approached the motionless, statue-like figure of the chieftain, his heavy, all-seeing gaze studying every wrinkle, every scar on the old khajiit's face. "You are the one," it sounded not like a question but a statement, "who decided you could oppose me. My will, my strength." The chieftain did not answer. He stood as if carved from the same stone as the desert at his feet. His eyes, deep set in their sockets, seemed utterly devoid of any thought, any human feeling, only emptiness, bottomless and cold as the night sky over lifeless sands. Only occasionally, almost imperceptibly to an outsider, did his gaze slide toward Mursal, shackled in humiliating chains. In that instant, quick movement of the eyes was no fear for himself, no plea for mercy, only a silent, bitter acknowledgement of the blood tie not even the strongest steel fetters could break. The Shaman observed him for several long, drawn-out moments, during which a whole world crumbled. He needed no words or explanations. He saw all that was necessary in this stone immobility of posture, in this emptiness of gaze, in this last, barely noticeable thread connecting father and son. He understood the quiet resolve behind this silence, and the accepted fate it silently proclaimed. He did not demand answers or humiliate him. Instead, he slowly, almost weightily nodded, as if answering unspoken but mutually understood words. The entire dialogue between victor and vanquished was over before it had begun. The Shaman, without taking his piercing gaze off the chieftain's motionless figure, made a barely noticeable, almost careless gesture with his hand. "Seize him," came the short, impassive order, like the strike of an axe, "and chain him beside his son." The orcs immediately, with growls, rushed forward. They met no resistance. The chieftain allowed the heavy, cold chains to be thrown over his thin shoulders without making a single movement, uttering a single sound, as if this were not captivity, but just another part of a long-known ritual. He was brought to Mursal, and their shoulders almost touched in a brief, mute contact of father and son, divided by steel, but not by shared will and shared pain. "For them, I have prepared a special fate," the Shaman said quietly, addressing more himself or his staff than anyone else. His even voice held a cold, joyless satisfaction of a collector, and his staff, as if confirming these words, flared weakly with crimson light in mute, sinister agreement. Then he turned to his vast host, and his voice suddenly thundered, filling all surrounding space from cliffs to sky. "Destroy everything here to the last thread. Raze this place to the ground. Let not one stone remain upon another. Let even the shadow of memory of this nest be erased from the face of the desert. Let this be a lesson to all. The shaman's voice regained its usual, iron power, ringing over the mounting din of the begun destruction. Who would dare even think to raise a hand against us? Nothing can withstand the Iron Maw. No sanctuary will save you. Your fury is nothing before our strength. Your freedom is but an illusion before our unyielding will. And under his words, under the victorious, wild cries of orcs, under the crash of collapsing dwellings and the rumble of falling rocks, the desert-wind rocky sanctuary ceased to exist forever, turning into a heap of shapeless stones and dust, a mute, terrible monument to the complete and unconditional defeat of a whole people. The army of the Iron Maw fell upon the defenseless sanctuary with methodical, almost ritual cruelty. Orcs, clinging like lizards, climbed the cliffs, prying out and hurling down the steps carved into stone over centuries, and the shaky hanging bridges. Ogres, using their huge hammers as battering rams, shattered the walls of caves that had once served as a secure home for many generations of khajiit. Clay jugs of precious water and meager grain stores that hadn't fit on the fleeing khajiits' backs were smashed against stones with a crash, and colored fabrics and quilted garments were torn to shreds and trampled by dirty boots. Wargs, driven by a blind instinct for destruction, digging into the earth with powerful paws, dug deep, shapeless pits in the very spots where children had played just that morning, leaving traces of their games in the sand. They tore out by the roots the hardy, meager desert plants, the last witnesses of stubborn life. Right by the spring, their greedy jaws breaking the fragile stems with a dry crunch. The spring itself, the heart and pulse of the sanctuary, was quickly and cold-bloodedly buried under heaps of sharp rock debris and tons of dry sand, interred under a shapeless, dead pile of stone, so that not even a hint of coolness, of life, remained in this now cursed place. The water that had seeped for ages was crushed and absorbed by an indifferent mass. The shaman observed the total, methodical destruction, standing motionless like a dark idol beside his notable captives. His gaze, fixed on the picture of memory being erased from the face of the earth, was cold, clear, and utterly, deeply satisfied. He saw not just the destruction of huts and hearths. He saw how not just a settlement was being erased from stone, but a whole culture, a whole unique way of life, hard-won over centuries in struggle with sand and sun. The language of whispers by the fire, hunting skills, patterns on pottery, children's songs, all turned to dust under the paws of his creatures. Look, his voice was surprisingly quiet, almost tensive, but it cut clearly as a blade through the general din of falling stones and bestial growling, addressing Mursal and his father exclusively, whose backs were straight and jaws clenched so tight the bone seemed ready to crack. Look upon the end of your small world. Let your hearts remember this lesson forever. Drive it into your memory like a nail. Strength, that is the only law that matters under this sun. And your strength, he gave a short, dry chuckle, turned out to be but a pale shadow, a child's game in a sandbox that crumbles at the first serious wind, when the last, slightest signs of habitation were destroyed, and the familiar cliffs surrounding the sanctuary turned into shapeless, faceless heaps of rubble and dust. The shaman slowly raised his hand. The din subsided, replaced by a tense, ringing silence. He gave a new, imperious command, and his words fell into this silence like stones into a bottomless well. Our path lies onward. His voice, accustomed to immediate and unconditional obedience, cut through the air, and the entire armada, orcs, ogres, wargs, froze in a single impulsive expectation. We go to the ancient, wild lairs, to those who for millennia have hidden not in shadow, but in the hottest, scorching sands, under the most blazing sun, where no foot of a reasoning creature has trod. He looked over his orcs with their sweaty, cruel faces, then cast a long, heavy gaze at the captives, helplessly shackled, their will broken but souls still smoldering. Manticores and Scorpidae have for millennia amassed their wild, primeval strength in the deepest reaches of the wastes, in its fiery bowels, their lethal venom that eats steel, their lightning, deceptive speed, their blind, fearless ferocity of faint, joyless, predatory smile touched the shaman's thin, pale lips. All that will now serve us. My will find a way to curb their savagery. My staff thirsts to absorb, to recast their new, uncivilized might into something greater. He raised his staff high, and the crimson crystal at its tip flared with an even light but a bright, insatiable, pulsing fire, as if in anticipation of new, mighty and alien prey. We will make them living weapons that will crush any who dare stand in our path. Let the most terrible, most ancient creatures of the desert become the new, unstoppable storm in the ranks of the Iron Maw. Let their roar be our battle cry. Through the ranks of orcs and ogres, from the front lines to the very rear, rolled an approving, animalistic, dull roar, full of thirst for new ruin and new strength. The shaman turned, his cloak swirling around him like a dark wing, and confidently, without a shadow of doubt, pointed his staff southward, toward the most lifeless, most pernicious and waterless regions of the wastes, where maps end and legends whispered of eternal fire beneath the sands. There, where neither orc foot nor warg paw had trod, but where slept the strength he craved to possess. The column, clanging with weapons and chains, moved on again, leaving behind only clouds of dust and dead ruins. On the spot where the living heart of the desert wind tribe had once beaten, only a scorched, dead zone remained, a silent, desolate space that the desert wind began slowly but surely to cover with its eternal sand, as if nature itself strove to hide the traces of monstrous cruelty and the very memory of those who had once called this place home. With each new day, the road leading the shaman's army deeper into the wastes grew harsher and more merciless. The soft, shifting sands were left far behind, giving way to an endless, cracked clay plain stretching to the horizon. The earth underfoot was etched with deep, hungry fissures, like the dry, old skin of some prehistoric giant. Here and there, sharp as razors, shards of volcanic glass and black stone protruded from the clay, resembling fragments of titanic claws driven into the earth in ages past. The sun hung in the faded, bleached sky as a dazzling, unblinking sphere, burning the last drops of moisture from the air and from lungs. Breathing grew ever more difficult, each inhalation searing the throat like hot sand. The shaman confidently, without breaking stride, walked ahead of all this steel mass, occasionally pausing briefly to plunge his staff into the sun-baked, stone-hard earth and close his eyes, listening to something audible and comprehensible only to him. The crimson crystal in such moments glowed weakly, but ominously and pulsed rhythmically, like a living, hungry heart buried in lifeless soil. After several days of this tortuous journey, when the shadows grew long and grotesque, he finally turned and declared for all to hear, "They are near. Ancient, wild strength that has never known a master's yoke. Their lairs are hidden underground, in stone labyrinths burrowed thousands of years ago, when the world was young." With nightfall, the huge army, exhausted by the long march across scorching sands, halted at the very edge of a deep canyon, as if the earth itself had gaped before it in mute warning. Giant fissures, like scars on the desert's face, plunged downward into dark, cold abyss, from which wafted a weak but relentless icy, musty breath of the underworld, a mixture of old, untouched for centuries dust, dampness, and something unliving. From the high, sheer cliff edge, where unstable ground crumbled under heavy boots, a sinister, mesmerizing view opened. Far below lay a gloomy, rocky canyon floor, strewn like hail with bones of unknown creatures bleached white by the merciless sun, either cast down here or finding their end here. Among them stood strange, fantastically eroded stone formations, not creations of hands, but blind sculptures wrought by wind and relentless, unhurried time alone. The canyon walls, russet and crimson, were pocked with numerous dark, night-like entrances. Each was the size of a healthy, mighty ogre, and their shape, uneven, jagged, left no doubt these caves had been gnawed by mighty jaws or clawed out by tireless taloned paws, scratching at stone day after day, year after year. From these black maws rose a strange, nauseating odor that hung in the cold air rising from below. It was a thick, clinging mixture of dry dust, sand, and something acrid, sour, with a clear, undeniable hint of decay and ancient, stone-imbued death. As the sun began to sink finally behind the jagged, torn edge of the canyon, tainting the cliffs in crimson, violet, and finally the deep color of congealed blood, the shaman, standing on the brink of the abyss like a motionless dark statue, ordered tersely, without extra words, to set up a temporary camp right here, in the canyon. His voice, dry and without hesitation, sounded like stone grating on stone. The order was not discussed. Night fell on the canyon swiftly and heavily, like a dropping curtain, bringing not coolness, but an oppressive, almost tangible silence that pressed on the ears. Even the eternal, mocking desert wind stilled, hid, as if afraid to disturb the ancient, slumbering denizens of these accursed places. In the Iron Maw camp, right at the cliff's base, fires were lit, not for warmth, which there was none, but for light, to ward off the dark. Their anxious, uneven, leaping reflections slid over the sheer cliff faces, momentarily illuminating the dark, mute cave entrances, as if probing them. And each time the light touched these black holes, it seemed something deep within reflected it for an instant, dull, damp, and motionless. The shaman sat by his separate fire, not releasing the staff from his clenched fingers. The crimson crystal at its tip pulsed rhythmically in time with his own breathing, like a living being sensing the proximity of something ancient, wild, and mighty. From time to time he raised his head and gazed long, unblinking, toward the black maws of the caves. His face a stone mask, but deep in his eyes burned a cold, insatiable fire of anticipation. From the impenetrable depth of the canyon, from below, came a distant scraping, as if something huge and heavy was scratching claws over granite. The orcs sitting by the fires froze as one, their fingers instinctively tightening on axe and sword hilts. Ogres stopped chewing their meager rations, their dull, broad faces expressing rare animal wariness. Mursal and his father, along with the other captive khajiit, chained to a heavy post in the camp center, heard these mounting sounds clearly. The old chieftain slowly met his son's gaze, and in his weary, much-seen eyes was a mute but clear warning, understandable without words. Some doors are better left unopened. In the largest, darkest cave, something stirred distinctly, unhurriedly. A dry, nasty rustle was heard, like chitinous plates grating on stone. The shaman slowly, as if on hinges, turned his head that way. His face showed not a shadow of fear or agitation, only the cold, absolute confidence of an experienced hunter who knows the long-awaited prey is near. Suddenly the ringing night silence was torn by quickening, loud sounds from several caves at once, first separate, wary rustles, then swiftly merging into a continuous, mounting stream, as if thousands of sharp claws were simultaneously scraping stone from within. The air around thickened with a low, threatening hum emanating from everywhere. The orc's outermost fire, right at the cliff's edge where rock fell away into dark void, suddenly went out. It didn't die gradually, smolder under ashes. It vanished, as if an invisible monster's maw closed over flame and smoke at once, swallowing both light and heat in an instant. The dull, viscous silence, lasting no longer than a breath, was broken. From the spot of the extinguished fire came a short, piercing, unnaturally high shriek, a cry so full of pure animal agony that the blood of all who heard it froze in their veins. And almost at once, this cry turned into a gurgling, choking rattle, as if the unfortunate warrior's throat was filled to the brim with thick, caustic, searing fluid. In the uneven, leaping light of neighboring fires, casting giant, dancing shadows on the cliffs, it was clearly seen how the orc, a motionless guard at his post a second ago, fell to his knees. His fall was strangely soft and limp, like a sack of bones. His mighty fingers, just recently gripping his axe, convulsively, with inhuman agony strength, clawed into the earth, scratching stone and clay, leaving deep, bloody grooves, as if trying to cling to life itself, slipping away from his twisted, wide-open mouth and from a hole in his throat where something terrible darkened. Only hoarse, whistling, bubbling sounds escaped, the venom already corroding vocal cords, devouring flesh and filling lungs, turning each breath into unbearable torture. His breastplate bubbled and developed strange stains, blackened, smoked, and began crumbling before their eyes, like rotten, wormy wood touched by swift rot. His arms jerked in disorderly, ghastly convulsions, and where splashes of venom hit the skin, flesh instantly peeled, curled, and charred, exposing whitish, unnaturally clean-looking finger bones that still kept scraping stone. The venom, injected by an unseen sting in the semi-darkness, acted not quickly but with horrifying method. It didn't just kill, it dissolved. It paralyzed nerves, decomposed living flesh from within, turning it to warm slurry, and with the same chilling, indifferent efficiency ate away the sturdy metal of armor as if it were not steel, but wax. A sweetish sour, nauseating smell emanated from the body, a mixture of chemical char and rotting meat, which a breeze from the cliff carried toward the sleeping camp. And in the silence that followed the rattles, this smell and the weak, involuntary grating of bony fingers on stone sounded louder than any battle cry, announcing that death had come without warning. And then from the thick shadow between stones, as if from the very darkness, the first massive body with leathery wings and a curved scorpion tail darted. Behind it, another, slightly smaller, and before any of the stunned orcs could react, raise a shield, or cry out, Their comrade's convulsing body was yanked back into the darkness, into the silence from which came only a short, moist crunch. One after another, like candles in a draught, the fires on the camp's outermost edges were swallowed by dark. With each extinguished flame came a new, ever more panicked death rattle. Here and there warriors of the Iron Maw fell under invisible, lightning strikes. As if sithed down, the air quickly filled with the acrid, nauseating smell of dissolving flesh and corroding metal. Mingled with the scent of fear, the shaman stood immobile in the camp's very center, his face lit only by the uneven flicker of his staff's crimson crystal. His cold, winter skies calmly slid over the chaos-gripped perimeter, unerringly noting each vanished point of light, each suddenly cut-off cry. He saw how shadows with membranous wings and lethal stings flicker at the very border of dark, plucking his warriors, one by one, like wolves snatching sheep from a flock. His long, bony fingers clenched the staff a little tighter. This was not a coordinated attack. It was cunning, calculated hunting. The manticores were testing them, probing for weakness. Like experienced predators trying the weakest and slowest in the herd, orcs milled in blind panic, ogres roared, swinging their heavy hammers, but hit only air, raising clouds of dust. The shaman slowly, unhurriedly, moved toward the camp's edge, to where the dark was thickest. His steps were measured and firm, as if there were no chaos, cries, and death around him. The soul-rending cries of the wounded and dull sounds of struggle seemed not to touch him at all, not to reach his consciousness. The crimson crystal of the staff flared brighter and fiercer with each step, casting long, leaping, bloody reflections on the sand. The light was thick, almost tangible. It didn't just illuminate, but disperse the very dark at the camp's border, pushing it back. A few paces from the last dying fire, the shaman halted. He clearly saw movement in the retreating dark. Large, muscular bodies with membranous wings flickered between stones. Chitinous tails with droplets of venom on stingtips twitched nervously in wait. The manticore's eyes, several pairs, reflected poisonous green fire in the receding gloom, full of predatory hunger. One of the predators, the largest and boldest, made a sharp lunge straight at him. Fast as a cobra's strike, the venomous sting, gleaming in the light, shot toward the shaman's chest. But he didn't even flinch, didn't twitch an eyebrow. Centimeters from his skin, the sting suddenly stopped, as if hitting an invisible, elastic wall, and hung in the air, emitting a light hiss. The shaman slowly, with a sort of solemn calm, raised his staff. Crimson light poured from the crystal in a solid, blinding stream, illuminating the entire canyon for an instant. Every stone, every crevice. The manticores hissed in unison and recoiled, scrambling back. This unnatural, crimson light clearly caused them physical pain, cut their multifaceted eyes. The predators, fearless and all-powerful moments ago, now reluctantly retreated into their saving dark. Hunters had become prey in an instant. The shaman stood motionless, his dark silhouette sharp and menacing in the center of the crimson radiance emanating from him. He uttered not a single word, issued no threats, but his silent message was clear and unambiguous. A new master was here, and his will was law. The crimson glow from the staff spread in thick, almost liquid light over the rough canyon walls, forcing the manticores to slowly, reluctantly retreat deeper into their caves. They emitted a dull, angry hissing, their emerald eyes flashing in the half-light with rage and fear. But not one of the creatures dared challenge this lone figure standing on the brink of the abyss. Now, even the night dark itself, eternal and sovereign mistress of these places, seemed to yield before this unnatural, devouring light from the crystal. The shaman slowly, without turning, moved forward, to the very edge of the canyon, and with each confident step, the ancient predators, backing away, retreated further. Their powerful, clawed paws, capable of rending steel, now scraped powerlessly and helplessly over stone. Another step, and the hunters, forgetting their millennia-old pride, began hastily shoving each other to hide in their stone dens. Only the tips of their venomous tails still twitched nervously in the air, but no longer posed any real threat. Without glancing back at the silenced camp, the shaman began a leisurely descent down the crumbling, terrorless slope of the canyon. The crimson beam, like a torch, plucked fantastical stone formations from the impenetrable gloom, stalactites hanging from the ceiling like tiers of petrified giants, and countless, faded bones thickly littering the canyon floor. Here lay the mingled remains of not only animals, but also those unlucky creatures that once, in long-forgotten times, had dared to penetrate this accursed place. Stepping onto the solid, bone-strewn canyon floor. The shaman stepped without hesitation into the gaping, maw-like opening of a huge cave. The light of his staff confidently pierced the age-old, stale dark, revealing from the gloom a tangled, web-like network of tunnels leading into the mountain's very stone bowels. The air in the cave was heavy, damp, and stale, thickly smelling of old chitin and something else, acrid, bitter, and nauseating, like a mixture of fresh venom and ancient, grave dust. He advanced into the cave's depths without fear, his step soundless, but the crimson light of the staff relentlessly forced the dark itself to retreat before him. Deep in the largest tunnel came wary rustling and muffled, angry hissing. The manticores were retreating but not surrendering completely, their fury bowling. Their shadows, swift and indistinct, flickered in side branches, like phantoms of this stone labyrinth readying for a new leap. The cave walls around him were etched with deep, chaotic scratches left over long silentures by the clawed paws of many generations. The floor underfoot was thickly carpeted with bones, some old, bleached by time, and drier others, lying in shadowy corners, still bearing traces of dark, dried flesh and shreds of sinew. The air grew thicker and heavier as he advanced, the acrid smell of chitin and fresh venom cutting the senses, becoming almost tangible. Suddenly the narrow tunnel widened sharply, revealing a vast, high-ceilinged grotto receding into blackness. Here, in the very heart of the canyon's stone bowels, lay the main lair. The core of this accursed place, on natural stone ledges, tiered like galleries, dozens of manticores sat and lay. Females, smaller and lighter, guarded squirming young adult males, massive and dark, grouped in the hall's center, forming a living wall. Their numerous eyes burned in the half-dark with poisonous green fire, and their flexible tails with venom droplets on sting tips were tensely raised, ready for instant attack. The shaman stopped at the very edge of the grotto, on the last patch of solid ground before this congregation of ancient evil. He slowly raised the staff, and crimson light, like a wave, flooded the entire subterranean chamber, making the manticores stir uneasily, hiss, and retreat a step. But this time they did not retreat in panic. The largest male, whose mane of sharp bone spines bristled with mute fury, took a heavy, threatening step forward, his claws clicking loudly on stone. Outsider came a voice from the oppressive dark, and the manticore leader's voice resembled the grinding of massive stone slabs, slowly crushing each other under the weight of ages. "You have entered our sanctum. Your insolence will be your last breath." The crimson light of the staff, painful and alien, painfully cut their sensitive eyes. But the creatures, driven by fury and instinct to defend their home, continued to slowly converge, relentlessly and silently, tightening the ring. Their chitinous, gleaming paws slid soundlessly over the damp stone floor, leaving behind sticky, glistening trails. Venomous stings writhed in the air, like living things, ready for a lethal strike. In the half-light, flooded with scarlet light, dozens of pairs of green, unblinking eyes burned, like a scattering of poisonous gemstones, coldly reflecting the crystal's sinister glow. The shaman stood motionless, and only a slight, almost imperceptible turn of the head betrayed his intense attention. He felt on his skin how ancient hostility thickened around him, heavy and dense like poisonous swamp mist. The air filled with a low, distant thunder-like growling. The manticores communicated among themselves, their voices full of hatred merging into a single, threatening chorus. "You have come to die." Biped, the leader hissed again, and his unfurled, leathery wings cast a huge, grotesquely twisted shadow with grotto's rough wall. In response, the shaman slightly, almost negligently, tilted the staff. The crimson radiance flared with new, blinding force, and the nearest creatures, blinded, recoiled, hissing in pain and rage. But the living ring did not break, it only slowed its movement, grew more cautious. The manticore's eyes, painfully narrowed from the hateful light, continued unwaveringly to follow his every muscular twitch. They were ready to pounce all together at any, most unexpected moment. And that moment came. A young male, whose unbridled rage proved stronger than the age-old instinct of self-preservation, suddenly, without warning, lunged forward. His clawed, powerful paws pushed off the stone with such force that small, bluish sparks flew from under the chitin. The venomous sting, like a whip, shot toward the shaman's exposed throat, swift, precise, and unavoidable as the strike of an enraged viper. But 3 broad hand spans from his skin, it suddenly halted, meeting an unseen, elastic barrier. The air around the shaman suddenly thickened, streamed with heat haze, and the crimson light of the staff flared with a short, blinding glare erupting from the crystal. The manticore's body, just a moment ago a formidable symbol of relentless predatory strength, suddenly shook in violent, unnatural convulsions. It seemed an invisible, shattering flame, born not of external fire but of destructive magic, pierced it through. From within, the sturdy chitinous plates on its back, gleaming with poisonous emerald sheen, first whitened like heated limestone, then instantly blackened and webbed with fell cracks. Emitting acrid, black smoke, from its gaping maw full of needle teeth came not a cry of rage or pain, but an unnatural, soul-rending shriek, more like the screech of tearing metal and bursting entrails. Its eyes, those same green, coldly burning gems, burst with a quiet, wet pop, leaving behind only smoking, empty sockets from which dark, thick fluid seeped. The monster crashed onto the stone with a dull, heavy thud that shook the ground, its mighty body still thrashing and jerking in final, meaningless death throes, limbs tracing ghastly, abrupt signs in the air. A sharp, unbearable smell of burnt flesh, melted chitin, and incinerated dinner essence hung in the stale canyon air, thick, sickly sweet, and thus even more nauseating. The shaman, unflinching, took a step forward toward the smoking body. His face remained a stone mask, but in his eyes flared that same crimson glint that pulsed in his staff. Slowly, with ceremonial clarity, he directed the staff's tip toward the manticore's blackened chest. The dull light in the staff's heart beat faster, turning into an uneven, greedily pulsing point. And then from the melted wound, from the very guts of the vanquished being, stretched a finest, trembling thread. It was not of light nor dark. It seemed woven of the very fear, pain, and wild, blind fury that had just left this body. This vibrating, translucent spiral, a soul, torn out forcibly and completely, crawled through the air, guided by the staff's inexorable will, and began to be drawn into its dark depths, feeding it with its perishing strength. The process was soundless and thus even more ghastly. With each inch of absorbed thread, the staff seemed to grow heavier, more saturated, while from the manticore's body remained only an empty, swiftly cooling shell, a charred husk. For a moment, complete, deafening silence reigned in the grotto. Even the threatening growling cut off, frozen in throats. All manticores, from the smallest to the largest, froze, their gazes full of horror fixed on their kin's body. The ancient, prehistoric instinct, briefly drowned by blind rage, awoke anew, cold, inexorable, and saving. Now they saw before them not just a bipedal intruder, but an incomprehensible force, capable of turning their own fury and might into a handful of ash. The shaman didn't move, showed not a single emotion on his stone face. Only the crimson crystal in his hand slowly dimmed, returning to its habitual, measured, flickering rhythm, as if having just quenched its thirst. That the terrible lesson was learned without extra words, absorbed by every pair of eyes, imprinted on every chitinous carapace. "Why have you come?" the leader hissed, and the rage in its grinding, stone under oppressed voice finally died, yielding to cold, animal weariness. Like a desert night without stars or death lurks behind every rock. Its leathery wings, earlier spread for attack, slowly, with a creak of taut high, folded behind its spiny back. The lethal, twitching sting lower, though its very tip, honed and most, still twitched minutely, nervously, betraying inner tension. The shaman turned the staff in his hand, and crimson light slid over his severe, immobile face, highlighting harsh cheekbones, a thin line of mouth, and a hard, rock-like, indifferent gaze in which was neither malice nor triumph. "I have come not to kill," his voice sounded evenly, heavily, and dully, like the strike of a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil in a subterranean forge. "I have come for strength, your strength, the strength that for centuries has been wasted here, in these stones, aimlessly and in vain." He took a leisurely, soundless step forward, straight into the very thick of this congregation of chitinous bodies, sharp claws, and venom-charged stings. The manticores, not taking their eyes off him, silently, but with a dull grating of carapaces, parted, opening a path for him to their leader. Their chitinous plates grated in the oppressive silence, the only sound breaking the dead, ancient peace of the grotto. "For millennia you have been the scourge that walks the sands, the bane of caravans, the nightmare of tribes." The shaman's voice was even and weighty, filling the dank grotto space, cutting into consciousness not with a shout, but with the inexorable heaviness of truth. "That the time of lone hunters, hiding in stones and content with chance prey, is past. Now we shall hunt together, as a pack, a pact no fortress wall will stop, before which no army will stand. The shaman smoothly, almost negligently, raised the staff. The crimson radiance, this time not searing and destructive but warm, thick, and viscous as old blood, enveloped the mighty, spiny figure of the leader. It caused no pain, only warmed the cold flesh, penetrating deep inside, to the very core of the ancient being, touching not the mind but its very wild, predatory soul. You will become part of me, part of a great army that will redraw the map of this old, decrepit world. I offer you not these scorched, barren wastes where you fought for every gulp of water and every patch of shade. I offer the whole world lying beyond them, all its forests, full of succulent prey, its cities, bursting with riches, and its peoples, crowding like herds on green plains, ready for slaughter. In his weary eyes flashed and died a last, distant spark of former fury. If the chance arises, if you see him, take vengeance. For all of us, it was not a master's command but a friend's last request, a testament, a dying wish. The chieftain embraced his most faithful friend tightly, brotherly, feeling the live tension of mighty, battle-ready muscles under his palms. Then he released him and stepped back, breaking the last visible link with the life he had once known and loved. The white saber-tooth looked at him for another moment, as if not understanding and not wishing to understand, and then slowly, with the great dignity of a wild beast, turned and strode toward the assembling caravan, carrying with it into the steppe a part of the chieftain's soul and his very last, secret hope. You will join me of your own will, the shaman continued, and a note resembling flattery, but a terrible and truthful flattery, entered his words. Become not slaves on a chain, not tamed beasts, but the scourge that will sweep over all foreign lands, obliterating everything in its path. Your wild fury and my unyielding will, together we shall become a single force, a single shadow before which all kings and empires will bow, trembling. The shaman slowly lowered the staff. The crimson glow faded, not weakly dwindling but as if drawn back into the crystal's heart, hiding, leaving behind in the grotto an oppressive, ringing silence, that special silence that follows a death sentence or the birth of a new, terrible oath. The manticore leader straightened to its full, chitinous height, and it seemed it grew even larger, filled with a new, alien resolve. Its leathery wings spread with a dull, elastic rustle, but now it was not a battle challenge but a gesture of acknowledgement and readiness, like a black banner unfurled before a campaign. In the dark, gaping depths of the grotto, from side tunnels and high ledges, other creatures stirred, and their eyes flared in the half-dark with dozens of pairs, like scattered poisonous emeralds suddenly ignited by the same coal, agreeing fire. Our stings and claws will serve you, the leader hissed, and each sound of its guttural voice was like the dull grinding of stone under monstrous pressure. But remember, piped, we are born for free hunting, not to be driven like cattle to slaughter. Break this, and we will taste your flesh sooner than the taste of foreign lands. Hunters should hunt. The shaman gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, and deep in his cold, reflectionless eyes flashed a thin, satisfied smirk, a shadow of that same predatory joy that moved his new allies. And I will lead you on the greatest hunt of all this world has known. The quarry is already chosen. When the time comes, you will learn it yourself. He turned, said no more, and with firm step headed for the grotto's exit. The manticore silently parted before him, forming a living, hissing corridor. Their hissing, earlier full of hatred, now merged into a strange, almost ritual song. No longer blind rage, only ancient, awakened might that had finally found its guide and a new path. The iron shaman, without looking back, climbed up the crumbling slope back to his camp. Below, among the dying fires and hushed tents, the orcs had already recovered from the night attack and bustle. Their dull, battered armor reflected the crimson glimmer of dawn and smoldering embers. The air was thick, reeking of soot, congealed fear, and something else, pungent as wormwood, an expectation of great change. His heavy, all-seeing gaze slowly slid over the faces of the warriors frozen in the pre-dawn gloom. In their eyes, usually dull, submissive, and seeing only command, he now caught something else. A new, dark spark smoldered and flared there, not just readiness to obey but a primal, insatiable hunger. Hunger for prey, blood, and that alien, wild strength of which he had spoken. It burned, like the reflection of a distant fire, dark and all-consuming as the wastes themselves at the most scorching, merciless noon, when the last drop of moisture evaporates and only dry, devouring desire remains. At dawn, the shaman's voice, sharp and clear, without a single note of doubt. Cut through the silence like a honed blade slicing thin skin. We move on, eastward. No explanations, no fiery, rousing appeals. Only a short, chopped order, cold and final. The orc standing in the front ranks merely stirred, tossing the word back without extra words. A heavy glance, a short nod, an expressive gesture of a hand gripping a weapon hilt was enough. Ogres rumbled with a dull, approving roar from the depths of their mighty chests and raised their massive, weighty hammers as if already feeling their weight in the coming clash. Wargs bared long, yellowish fangs, exposing gums, and their nostrils twitched spasmodically, catching in the dry air at hint of close, unfamiliar prey. The path lay forward, toward the rising, all-seeing sun, and no one dared not just voice but even harbor in the depths of their soul a shadow of doubt in their master's decision. With the first, already scorching sun rays that burned skin like hot coals and heated armor metal, the shaman's entire army, this living, iron-breathing monstrosity, came into motion, obeying a single will. It headed east, their new path leading into even more accursed, even more inhospitable lands. Into the very furnace of the wastes, they marched into the realm of the Scorpidae, ancient, almost legendary creatures armored in stone-hard Karapachi, whose blind, tireless ferocity, whispered about by elders at firesides, could surpass even the manticores or find fury. There, where under scorching stone slabs lurked another, more ancient and mindless evil. The wastes beyond the camp slowly changed their familiar appearance. Familiar golden sands gave way to a lifeless, cracked clay plain, furrowed with deep, scar-like fissures, like wrinkles on the face of an ancient, slumbering jaundice. The air grew drier, each gulp searing the throat as if the dust here were mixed with fine glass and ashes. Over the shimmering horizon wavered a dense heat haze, distorting the already monstrous outlines of distant rocky spires. The shaman walked unwaveringly at the head of the stretched-out column, his staff with the crimson crystal pulsing rhythmically in time with his steps, as if echoing an unseen rhythm of this dead place. He felt with his skin the ancient, wild might of these lands, that which was older than the oldest sands, and more merciless than the most scorching desert heat. Behind him, in thick clouds of dust raised by thousands of feet and paws, moved his entire motley army, orcs in worn armor, ogres with heavy, jagged hammers, wargs with fire-burning eyes, and ahead, where shifting sands merged with the red-hot sky, new, unknown allies already awaited them, or new, numerous victims. In the wastes, as the shaman knew, the line between these two concepts was always as thin as a razor's edge. At sunset, when the sun, like a bloody, blind ball, touched the very edge of the desert, they stumbled upon the first body. A huge scorpion lay prone among sharp stones, its humanoid torso unnaturally twisted, its segmented, gleaming abdomen webbed with deep, ragged cracks. Powerful, blacksmith tongues like claws, capable of crushing stone, were now helplessly splayed in the sand. The long, lethal sting trailed on the ground like a whip broken mid-length. The air around was thick, heavy, and motionless, smelling of the sweetish honey of decay, with an acrid, bitter admixture of venom. Black, bead-like eyes were frozen immobile, reflecting the dying, crimson day. The hard chitinous plates, once polished to a sheen, were covered with an intricate, web-like pattern of cracks, like a map of great rivers dried up forever millennia before this. The shaman silently bent over the dead creature. His staff tapped lightly against the Karapachi, and the crystal at its end flared with a short, bright crimson light. Over the scorpion's blackened body immediately ran thin, glowing crimson threads, as if the staff were sucking out the last, fading traces of life, trying to read in them the secret of its demise, like an open book. Before the shaman's inner vision, as if in reality, fleeting but clear images of a recent, brutal clash passed. At the very foot of black cliffs, where stone met sand, two scorpion clans had met in a lethal duel, fighting in the ancient, waste-souled ritual of the sting. A young warrior, its body full of unbridled strength and fury, had challenged an old, scar-covered leader. Its sharp claws shattered the rival's sturdy chitinous Karapachi with crashes, each blow marked by furious force and blind precision. But long years had endowed the leader with a different, more terrible valor, cold patience and cunning survival wisdom. At the decisive, climactic moment, when the youth, intoxicated by battle, was already preparing to taste victory's fruit, the old scorpion made a deceptive, unexpected lunge. Instead of a head-on, forceful attack, it jerked sharply aside, and its lethal sting, like lightning, shot not at the chest but at the very base of the opponent's tail. The sharp, needle-like tip pierced the chitinous shell right at the venom gland. The sturdy chitin cracked with a crunch, releasing the young scorpid's concentrated, deadly venom straight back into its own body. The venom, meant to destroy an enemy, coursed through its creator's own veins, scorching everything in its path. Terrible, uncontrollable convulsion seized the mighty body. It lay, helplessly watching as the victor's figure slowly and majestically vanished into the crimson evening sands. Its own destructive might became the final and chief instrument of its demise. The shaman smoothly, effortlessly, withdrew the staff from the blackened Karapachi. The crimson glow faded, leaving behind silence and new, precious knowledge. The scorpid's blind pride was their chief vulnerability, and their own venom was the very key that would unlock the door to their subjugation. The shaman slowly, with a dull crunch of sand under boots, rose to his full height, his long, bony fingers closing in a dead grip on the staff's haft. The crimson crystal cast anxious, leaping reflections on the light sand. He gazed toward the darkening, jagged cliffs on the horizon, mentally constructing and weighing each step of the future plan. The memories forcibly drawn by the staff from the dead scorpid painted a clear, map-like picture before him. Endless underground labyrinths, whole oasis cities hidden beneath dunes. Their complex rituals and clan-bound, unshakable pride made these creatures strong, but also predictable. Too confident in their strength, too fixated on time-hallowed traditions. With the first blinding sun rays, bearing new heat, they moved straight for the cliffs. The crimson crystal of the staff guided the shaman inexorably, like a magnetic compass needle, unerringly pointing the way to the hidden undersand vibrations of alien, seething life. With each step, the pulsation intensified, turning into a persistent, summoning hum in his consciousness. At the very foot of the black, lifeless cliffs, they found what they sought. Narrow, almost invisible fissures, artfully camouflaged, and indistinguishable from surrounding stone. But the shaman saw what was utterly hidden from others' eyes. Fresh, deep grooves left by massive, dragging bodies were visible on the sand right by the entrance. The air here was thicker, heavier, and more stagnant, reeking of that same acrid, bitter mixture that emanated from the dead scorpid. From the shadow of one of the largest fissures, silently, the guard emerged. Two huge scorpidae stepped into the blazing light, their black, coal-like bead eyes gleaming in the morning rays, expressing neither thought nor emotion. Powerful chelicerae closed in the air with a threatening, dry click, silently warning outsiders of danger. In the depth of the dark tunnel, other numerous shadows stirred, reflecting light. There were many more of them. The shaman halted, sharply raising his hand in a commanding, halting gesture. He watched with a cold gaze as his warriors slowly but surely drew toward the cliff base, stretching across the scorched desert like a giant, unhurried snake coiling for a decisive strike. Orcs, crumbling, were formed into familiar battle formations, their green, sweaty faces distorted by tension. Ogres with a dull, metallic clang set their massive, spike-studded hammers on the ground, readying for a brutal clash. Wargs, whining, took positions on the flanks, their eyes gleaming with animal excitement in anticipation of blood and battle. He clearly understood, with the scorpidae, these ancient creatures, everything would be completely different, not like with the manticores, whose blind, instinctual fury could be managed like reins. These beings were older, wiser. Their complex society had been built for centuries on strict, unshakable laws and blood-sanctified rituals. Mere loud words and threats would clearly not be enough here. The shaman's fingers tightened harder, whitening knuckles on the familiar staff haft. The crimson crystal immediately responded with a restrained but powerful pulsation, filling with dark, ready to pour strength. His piercing gaze slid over the forming troops, mentally calculating and weighing the forced disposition. Mighty ogres against impenetrable chitinous carapaces, nimble orcs for diversionary maneuvers, swift wargs for crushing flank attacks. He was ready to apply brute, shattering force. But this blow, as he understood, must be precise as the movement of an experienced surgeon's hand lancing a ripe abscess. The scorpidae themselves, by their death, had shown him their chief vulnerability, and now he was to exploit it ruthlessly. From the dark, gaping fissures in the cliffs, like dark blood from an open wound, more and more scorpidae continued to silently appear. Their ranks grew with every moment, forming before the mysterious underground entrances a living, shifting wall of chitin and venom. First dozens, then already hundreds of gigantic creatures lined up in a single, threatening defense line. impenetrable and lethal. Their chitinous carapaces, studded with growths and scars, gleamed with an oily, iridescent sheen in the morning light. Powerful, blacksmith tongues like claws closed and opened with a dry, bony click resembling the sound of breaking ribs. Long, segmented venomous stings twitched nervously in the still air, ready for a lightning, irresistible strike. Numerous black, expressionless bead eyes looked upon the intruders with cold, indifferent hatred, who had disturbed the age-old peace of their land. The very air around thickened with a low, threatening buzzing, a sound remotely like cicada chirring but far deeper, more ominous, and inexorable. The Scorpidae, or clearly communicating among themselves, coordinating their defense without words. All their movements were precise, disciplined, and synchronized, so unlike the chaotic, blind fury of manticores. The shaman stood motionless and watched this mounting, living rampart of chitin and venom. His vast army now stood to the death against seemingly superior forces, ready to tear to pieces any who dared take a step toward their invisible border. From the flawlessly lined ranks of Scorpidae, one slowly, with imperturbable, ancient dignity, stepped forward. It noticeably surpassed all, skin in both size and stature. Stark chitinous carapace was thickly etched with whitish scars, mute witnesses of many, many battles. On massive, mighty claws, deep notches and chips were visible, and each of these marks could tell its own separate, bloody story. This was the leader. Its black, polished obsidian-like eyes studied the shaman intently, unblinkingly, assessing, calculating, weighing every feature of his face. The long venomous sting behind its back curved smoothly, assuming a definite position, not openly threatening but authoritative and indisputable. Like a scepter in an ancient monarch's hand, it halted a few paces from the shaman, and the air between them instantly grew thick and heavy with mute tension. Even the orcs, usually frenzied and clamorous, fell silent, instinctively sensing the moment's significance. Two rulers, two unyielding wills faced each other on the scorched sand. "What brings you to our lands, outsider?" The Scorpid leader's voice sounded low and dull, like the distant grinding of massive stones crushed deep beneath the earth's thickness. The shaman met its bottomless gaze without a trace of hesitation or fear. In these black, time-polished bead eyes, he clearly discerned not simple curiosity. There, in the depths, lurked age-old, cold wisdom and that very fury that had accumulated in the desert's darkest caves. Longer than whole peoples live and perish. "I come here not as a simple conqueror," the shaman replied, and his even, metallic voice took on a honed, that already steel edge. "I bring you a proposal, one not refused." The Scorpid leader slowly, with threatening deliberation, closed and opened its giant claws. Chitinous plates on its powerful chest rustled from the movement, like a heap of fallen leaves under a traveler's feet. "Our clans have no need for outsiders' proposals. We have seen thousands of dawns and sunsets without any alien aid." "Perhaps that is so." The shaman took one deliberate but authoritative step forward, and sand crunched loudly under his heel. "But tell me, old warrior, how many dawns do you have left to see if you continue to stand here in proud solitude? The world around you is changing, and changing fast. The time has come to choose your side. Who are you, truly?" The leader's voice sounded sharper, with a light hiss, like stone grinding on stone. Its black bead eyes narrowed to thin, assessing slits. "You are not who you pretend to be. You do not carry the fierce stench of their tribe." The shaman felt on his skin how the air around suddenly grew thicker, heavier, more hostile. Even the orcs behind him froze in unnatural poses, catching this sudden, dangerous shift. The Scorpidae standing behind their leader tensed as one, their venomous stings rising higher, ready for an instant, lethal strike. "I am the future itself," the shaman answered, and the crimson crystal on his staff flared weakly but ominously in response, casting leaping, bloody reflections on the sand. "And the future, as is known, rarely comes in the very guise we expect of it." The Scorpid leader slowly, with dignity, shook its massive head. Chitinous plates on its neck rustled like a bundle of dry, dead leaves. "I have seen your king over the centuries," it hissed, and its voice held notes of something like contempt. "They languish under the scorching sun, flee from sandstorms, howl at the moon. But you had took another, more decisive step closer, studying the shaman with unconcealed animal interest. You carry a different, alien strength, ancient, like the oldest stones lying at the bottom of the deepest, darkest caves." The shaman didn't flinch or avert his heavy gaze. He clearly understood. This old, Much-seen warrior discerned in him far more than one might suppose at first glance. The rules of this dangerous game had to be changed on the fly. I am the one rewriting the fates of this old world. The shaman's voice sounded with a new, heavy, subterranean weight, as if stone slabs were shifting in the earth's very depths. And I bring you, leader, as simple choice, become part of the new world or vanish, without trace, in the dust of the old world's history. The crimson crystal on his staff flared in response brighter, fiercer, casting long, anxious reflections on the sand like the glow of a distant but inexorably approaching fire. The very air round trembled, filling with thickened, ready to spill energy emanating from this ancient, insatiable artifact. The scorpid leader sharply retreated a step back, its mighty, ram-like claws instinctively closing before it in a defensive, shield-like posture. Yet in its black, bottomless bead eyes was now not just blind resistance. There, in the depths, a spark of awakened, predatory interest smoldered and flared, oddly mingled with its millennia-old, cold wisdom. You preach from on high like a prophet, it grated, each sound like grinding stones, but from you, outsider, smells of old blood and fresh ashes. What new order exactly do you carry in your bony hands? The shaman slowly, almost ritually, raised his staff. Crimson light, this time not cutting but soft and thick, enveloped the leader's figure, causing it no physical pain but awakening something ancient and slumbering in the most hidden corners of its memory. The order in which Scorpidae cease to be mere shadow dwellers of the desert but become its sole and rightful masters. The order where your natural strength will be not just a weapon to defend burrows, but the mark of true, indisputable power over all living things. The scorpid leader froze, enveloped in crimson radiance, and seemed to stiffen in mute astonishment. But in the swirling, vortex-like waves of light before its inner vision, other, terrible visions suddenly unfolded. The countless, gray hordes of the Iron Maw sweeping across the desert like a steel, all-devouring locust swarm. It beheld burning, smoke-blackened oases and fallen, expiring clans of its kin, their sturdy chitinous carapaces cracking and crumbling under ogres' shattering hammers. No, roared the leader, with incredible inner effort tearing free from these enchanting yet deceitful bonds. We will not become another cog in your monstrous war machine. At its mute but clear signal, all Scorpidae instantly, as if by a single command, transformed into a formidable, well-drilled battle order. At the front, like a wall, stood kin tempered in hundreds of hunts, raising their shield claws behind them, threateningly raising tails. Warriors with poised stings lined up, ready for projectile attacks. From both flanks, young, agile fighters smoothly advanced, taking predetermined positions for enveloping and lethal maneuvers. You shall have your long-awaited answer, prophet, the leader hissed. And each sound of its voice was like stone breaking under a press. But it will be not with words, but with the steel of claws and our venom. The shaman watched this swift reorganization with cold, almost academic, detached interest. Exactly such a furious and direct reaction he had expected from these proud, inflexible children of the desert, predictable as sunrise over russet dunes. I am no prophet, the shaman answered, and his voice suddenly acquired a strange, metallic, multi-voiced echo, as if invisible thousands spoke through him, merged into one will. I am something immeasurably greater. And those visions that appeared before you, they are not mere empty threat. They are the coming future, inevitable if you and your kind reject my will. The crimson crystal on the staff flared with new, almost blinding force, casting long, unnaturally curved, dancing shadows on the sand. The very air around trembled and hummed low, as if from the toll of a giant, invisible bell. You beheld only the demise of your kin. But what follows will be far worse for you. Complete, hopeless oblivion. Eternity without memory, without name, without the slightest trace in this world's great chronicle. The shaman took a leisurely step forward, and the sand under his feet instantly blackened and fused into a glassy crust, as if touched by unearthly, cold flame. I offer you not slavery, but a great alliance. Yet even my patience is not limitless. I believe not a single word of yours. The leader's voice sounded firm as the grinding of to granite slabs, its mighty claws, closed before its chest with a loud, dry, shot-like click. We, children of stone and sand, do not acknowledge your magic. It is treacherous and false as a venomous snake lurking under a thin layer of sand. The only language we understand and respect is the language of pure, undoubted strength. It took a heavy, decisive step forward, and the chitinous carapace on its chest creaked under tension like an old oak shield ready to receive a blow. Show your might without these tricks with shadows and ghostly visions. Prove it here and now, as a true warrior of the desert, not as a spell-whispering dark sorcerer. The Scorpidae lined up behind it stirred their venomous stings, grew agitated, and twitched in clear anticipation of the desired clash. The air again filled with low, threatening buzzing, like the hum of an angered hornet swarm. Or else begone with your empty threats. The desert earth tolerates neither lies nor deception. The shaman didn't release the staff from his right hand, but his free left hand with lightning speed grasped the hilt of a short ritual dagger, forged from black, night-like obsidian. The blade, covered entirely with fine runes, remained matte and utterly dark, without a single gleam or reflection, only cold, sharp stone honed to lethal sharpness. You shall receive exactly what you so insistently ask for. His voice sounded surprisingly calm, and even, as if speaking of the simplest, mundane transaction. The leader attacked first, without warning. Its right claw, mighty as a mechanism, shot forward with a loud click to crush the opponent. But the shaman's obsidian blade already awaited it on the path. The blade met the sturdy chitin with a dry, sharp sound like ice cracking underfoot. In the same instant, the shaman twisted the staff crosswise, blocking the path of the venomous sting shooting toward his face. No blinding flashes of light, no shining magical barriers. Only the brute strength of muscle, phenomenal speed of reaction, and battle art honed to automatism. The shaman moved with an unorc-like refined, almost feline grace, when the leader's massive claw crashed down with a dull roar where he had stood a moment before. He didn't parry with the staff, but nimbly leapt aside with the agility of a desert cat. The sand under his feet barely stirred. With its second, left claw, the leader tried to seize him in its lethal vice, but the shaman, bending, slipped under the chitinous arc, and the sharp obsidian blade left a deep, dark fluid seeping gash on the vulnerable, soft inner side of the limb. The venomous sting, flashing in the sun, whistled past centimeters from his face. The shaman leaned back with unnatural, almost serpentine smoothness, as if his body had neither bones nor joints, obeying a different physics. Each of his movements, each weight shift resembled a honed lethal dance, calculated to the millimeter, devoid of fuss. The leader, gripped by blind fury, pressed on fiercely, its heavy chitinous carapace creaking and groaning under monstrous tension. But the shaman kept dodging, using his staff only to parry the few attacks that couldn't be fully avoided. He seemed to literally anticipate the opponent's every move, reading its intentions from the barely noticeable, barely perceptible tension of muscles under the gleaming carapace. This was not just acquired dexterity, it had been absorbed by him along with the very soul and memory of the vanquished khajiit, becoming an integral part of his own being. The scorpid leader began to breathe harder, its mighty, barrel-like chest heaving convulsively and infrequently. Each new attack grew ever more furious, frenzied, but lost its former, murderous precision, turning into wide, almost blind swings. The shaman, however, kept moving with the same frightening, emotionless efficiency, his body reading the language of battle at the level of ancient instincts, inherited from a whole people. He caught a barely noticeable, almost ghostly shift in the rear segments of the leader's mighty body, the sure sign, known to him, of preparation for that very lethal sting lunge. Instead of retreating, the shaman, like a spring, lunged forward, slipping so close to the cold chitinous body that he heard the ominous, fluid hiss of venom in glands filled to bursting. The short obsidian blade flashed a dull gleam in the air, leaving on the body a deep, precise incision right at the tail's base, damaging the thin chitinous shell concealing the venom gland. A deafening roar erupted, in which acute physical pain and all-consuming fury of impotence were oddly mixed. The sharp sting, flying in vain, plunged into the sand with a dull thud where the shaman's head had been an instant before. But the deep, masterfully inflicted cut by the obsidian blade did its work. The damaged, overcharged venom gland couldn't withstand internal pressure. The chitinous shell cracked with a quiet crunch, releasing the concentrated, lethal venom straight into the leader's own body. The titanic scorpid froze in place, its numerous limbs seized by the familiar, fatal convulsion. It was poisoned by its own weapon, doomed to repeat exactly the bitter fate of that very youth whose dead body they had found on the way to these cliffs. The shaman stood motionless and watched as the mighty, just recently formidable body of the leader slowly, fighting convulsions, sank onto the scorched sand. In his eyes was not a shadow of triumph or gloating, only cold, indifferent understanding of the inexorable logic and justice of what had happened. Bitter irony of fate, he uttered quietly, almost to himself. You perish by the very same weapon that not long ago kept you in power. The other Scorpidae froze in oppressive, deafening silence, broken only by the leader's intermittent, gurgling death rattle. Their formidable, invincible chieftain, whose strength and authority had seemed unshakable, now lay in the dust, thrashing in agony, poisoned by its own sting's venom. In their multiple black bead eyes was deepest consternation. Their entire age-old way of life, based on strength, hierarchy, and honest duel, was crumbling before their eyes in an instant. The shaman slowly, unhurriedly, approached the convulsing body. He knelt on one knee and brought the crimson, greedily pulsing crystal of the staff to the dying leader's brow. The stone flared blindingly, and from the scorpid's body stretched thin, trembling threads of golden light, like a spiderweb, being absorbed into the crystal's insatiable depths. He absorbed not just the departing life, he drew in the very essence of the vanquished warrior. All its combat experience accumulated over long centuries, the ancient clan wisdom, the secret knowledge of all rituals and unshakable laws of the desert. When the last, thinnest thread of light vanished into the crystal's depth like a last breath, the stone went dark, visually darker, denser, heavier. The leader's body went completely limp, becoming merely an empty, lifeless shell. The shaman smoothly rose to his feet and turned to the stunned, silent Scorpidae. In his eyes now burned not only his own familiar knowledge, there was reflected also the alien, millennia-old wisdom of their people, as if he had absorbed the very soul and memory of the desert. The shaman slowly, authoritatively, looked over the gathered Scorpidae, and in his bearing, in his very stance, appeared an elusive but important change. Now it hinted not only at Orcish crude might but at the age-old, measured wisdom of all desert dwellers. He raised the staff, and the crimson crystal at its tip glimmered with a new, deep light, the color of dark, old amber. Your leader fell in honest combat, by your own rules. His voice sounded, unexpectedly acquiring strange, low overtones, as if through it now spoke all former, great rulers of the Scorpidae. By your own ancient and unbreakable laws, the power and the right to lead have passed to me. But I, he paused, letting the words sink into consciousness, shall not rule you as a simple foreign conqueror. He took a firm step forward, and the Scorpidae involuntarily, as one, retreated half a step, sensing in him something immeasurably greater than just a new chieftain. I shall become for you what he was, protector, chieftain, and father. And together, under my lead, we shall be mightier than ever. We shall take what rightfully belongs to the strongest. We shall make all proud rulers bow and conquer all lands from sea to sea. We shall establish a new, eternal order and raze to the ground all the rotten foundations of the old, decrepit world. His words, heavy and sonorous, hung in the sultry, motionless air, filled with inexplicable, hypnotic persuasiveness. The Scorpidae kept a tomb-like silence, but now not with challenge and hatred, but with deep, respectful, animal deliberation. Their ancient, sand-old instincts unerringly told them what now stood before them. Not just a new chieftain, but something new, unknown, and frightening. Something that would forever change their world and their place in it. From the closed ranks of Scorpidae, slowly, with ancient dignity, the eldest surviving warrior stepped forward, its chitinous carapace, covered with whitish scars of many battles and ritual duels, gleamed dully in the morning light like time-polished stone. It bowed its massive head before the shaman, and its mighty, notched claws close in an ancient, known only to them ritual gesture of unconditional recognition and oath. You defeated our chieftain in honest, equal combat. The old warrior's voice sounded low and dull, like stone grinding in a cave's depth. By the unbreakable law of the desert, you are now our leader and master. We shall follow you wherever you lead. One after another, first hesitantly, then with growing confidence, the other Scorpidae began repeating this significant gesture, bowing heads and closing claws. The air around thickened with a measured, rhythmic clacking of closing chitinous plates. The ancient, sand-old salute of desert warriors honoring a new chieftain. Even the most furious and loyal supporters of the fallen leader, gritting their teeth, eventually bowed before the inexorable, age-sanctified will of clan tradition. You will come when I call you, and only then. The shaman uttered, and his simple, clear words sounded in the ensuing silence with the finality of a verdict carved in stone. The shaman observed the entire scene of subjugation with a stone, inscrutable face, but deep in his cold eyes smoldered and flared a spark of cold, joyless satisfaction. He slowly turned to his vast army, where orcs and ogres stood in full battle readiness, holding their breath, and solemnly raised his staff. The crimson crystal at its tip flared with a short but bright light, casting long, leaping bloody reflections on the gray sand. "Now," he proclaimed in a voice brooking no argument, "we return to the Iron Maw. Our true, great mission is only beginning." The return journey, easy and untroubled, was far swifter than the arduous, exhausting advance into alien lands toward the scorpid lairs. A well-trodden path and lack of resistance allowed the huge army to move almost without rest, day and night, as if the wastes themselves, acknowledging him as master, parted before the victors. And when over the darkened horizon slowly rose that same full and cold moon that had seen them off on the campaign, ahead, in the evening gloom, loomed the familiar, sinister outlines of the Iron Maw. First in the twilight light, only the black, sharp contours of the palisade were visible, resembling the giant ribs of a fallen beast driven into the earth. Then, as they neared, the clear outlines of the blackened, smoking mound with the bone pyramid at its very summit emerged, that very throne from which the Iron Shaman extended his will over all the surrounding lands. The air thickened with every 100 steps, filling with the painfully familiar, acrid mixture of smelter fumes, soot, and eternal fear. The earth underfoot gradually turned into a viscous, sticky gray-brown slurry of mud, coal dust, ashes, and unknown waste. Thawing in the evening cool, it exuded all the smells that hung thickly in the stale air. Acrid smoke, the acid of burned hair, and that cloying, sweetish spirit of human despair that had become an integral part of this place. The shaman halted on the last approach to the huge basin where his domain lay. Not so long ago, he had left this place at the head of a mere Orcish host. Now he returned to his citadel of sorrow and might, bearing with him the united, terrible strength of two of the desert's most ancient peoples. The Iron Maw, black and silent, awaited its master, ready at his word to open wide and swallow the rest of the world. Thank you for your attention. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part and chapter.